The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics anticipates greater than 30% growth through 2020. So there's new people coming into our industry every single day. And frankly, it's a logical transition from network and system admins. They know the systems. And so it makes it a pretty easy transition. And if done well, can actually be a very powerful transition. But at the end of the day, admins are generally more worried about making stuff work than making it secure. Trust me, I've been there. So why a 12-step program? Well, Wikipedia defines a 12-step program this way. And while it looks pretty heavy in a lot of places, if we look a little bit closer, we see something that's very applicable to what we're trying to do. That a set of guiding principles outlining a course of action for tackling problems. Can anybody here say that information security in its current state is not a problem? So what's a 12-step program without an admission statement? Well, there is no silver bullet to security. There's dozens of vendors just down the street here, all selling their wares, saying, I've got the solution to all your security woes. Well, that's all fine and good, and those tools are great, and they can be extremely useful if you have the right personnel and the right processes in place. So before we get started, we need to deal with some arguments you're going to hear. Let's establish the baseline. Otherwise known as arguing with the IT manager, because everybody has at least one guy in the organization that thinks they're just fine. That whether it's naivete or just general disregard for the risks, they think they're just fine. So we got the security by obscurity argument. How many times have we heard this? I'm small. Nobody cares about me. Because it's not just who you are, it's what you have and who you're connected to. One of the largest breaches in recent history, Target, came because a very small HVAC company was breached. And they rode right through the back door. Additionally, small doctor's offices. They may not have much, but how much PII? Or, do they have the money to secure everything appropriately? Oh, but I have a firewall. Isn't that enough? Now, let's go talk to the lockpick guys and see if a lock on your front door is sufficient. I don't think so. This doesn't help with stolen and misused credentials. If I can get legitimate credentials and come through your front door, your firewall is all but useless. But I don't have budget. Well, yes, budget is nice to have, but it's certainly not a requirement. There's tons of open source tools, things that you can do without having to spend any money. And finally, if you don't have budget for security, how are you going to have money to handle the incident or the breach when it happens? And my personal favorite. But we're compliant. Well, so we're Target, Neiman Marcus, and Michaels. Anybody that's ever worked in compliance knows that compliance is a whole lot more about spinning the facts to check boxes than actually being secure. Compliance is merely the starting point. So, take and maintain inventory. Yeah, this seems pretty boring. And this definitely sounds a lot more like the admin world than the security world. But how can you defend what you don't know you have? Because after all. So you need to know what you have, where it is, who's responsible for it. But it's not just a list of systems. You need to know what are your critical systems. Which systems, if they were compromised or they were lost, you have to close your doors tomorrow. And make sure you're protecting in order. Do we really think developers are going to patch their own test servers? How many developers only install the modules on Apache they really need? Or don't chmod to 777? So, in the arguments, we said that you don't have to have a massive budget. I've never seen a network that doesn't have plenty of security controls that can be implemented with what you already have. If you knew you were being pen tested tomorrow, or if you knew you were being attacked tomorrow, what would you go change? You don't have time to procure the new technology and implement it by tomorrow. What are you going to do? Do you have antivirus deployed, across your corporate without HIPS enabled? Or do you have an IPS installed only in detection mode? How many free vendor tools are available that you're not currently using? Whether it be Microsoft Laps. Who here has popped a Windows box and then used that to move through the network with a local admin? Not hard. And while Laps may not be a total solution for that, it definitely makes it a little bit more difficult. And then community editions and open source. NXLog is a fantastic tool for pulling and reformatting logs. If you haven't used it, I'd recommend taking a look at it. Kali, Wireshark, Nmap, Metasploit, all available. Don't cost a thing. So, here we're at step 5. Let's finally get down. Let's go into the details. Let's get under the hood. Does your firewall do what you're supposed to? We know it's not the end-all, be-all, but it's still a nice It's still important to be there. Are the ACLs documented? Do you know who put it there? Why is it there? Is it still needed? And, can it be locked down further than it is? Do your policies do what you think they do? So many policies get so complicated. Do you have an allow that overrules your denies, or a deny that overrules your allow? Is it really, do you think, does this mean what you think it means? And is everything installed as part of your golden image still necessary? Are you deploying new machines with vulnerable versions of code, or vulnerable versions of applications, or applications that are no longer needed? But we know security is not just about technical controls. We all have to deal with people. So, do you allow BYOD? Okay, you allow them in. Or do you allow them on the Wi-Fi? If you allow them on the Wi-Fi, how well are they segmented off? Do you allow them to take corporate resources home, or at Starbucks, or work security cons? Do you have the proper physical security controls? Because at the end of the day, if I can touch it, I can own it. And can you enforce your policies? Have you had the tough conversation with the HR and legal to make sure that the conversations that you're going to have, or that you can actually enforce the policies you have? If somebody does what you say they're not supposed to do, can you remove them for it? And are you following your own policies? How many times have we seen in the news where a company had documented policy of what they were going to do, but they weren't following it, and they opened themselves up to all sorts of litigation and bad PR? Now this one, I realize as security professionals, we all roll our eyes when we get the email once a year, time to go do our security awareness training. Yeah, most of those are a waste of time. We all know that. But at the end of the day, users are still almost always a weak link. The VDBR says in as few as 10 emails they got a 90% efficiency rating. The campaigns keep getting harder to detect. Has anybody here not almost been fooled? Whether you have or not, I'm not going to ask that. But, they're getting much harder to detect. The attackers are getting better. And everyone needs to understand the role they play. If you don't believe this, walk in the SECTF room later this week at DEF CON and see how quickly every user they talk to is giving out valuable information. Because it only takes one to either breach or detect. One of the VDBR research companies said that almost 10% of their detection came from their human sensor. Okay, so we've talked about firewalls, and we said that's not sufficient. We've talked about you getting your admin, your technical policies. So now what? Well, incident's inevitable, so you better be watching. We know it's going to happen. And that doesn't mean just logging and forgetting about them later. That means actually looking at your logs. It's important to remember that incidents don't necessarily mean a multi-billion-dollar credit card breach. It may just be somebody saying too much, or information leakage at a restaurant within earshot of somebody that shouldn't be hearing. The sooner you can detect, the more you can lessen your damage. And not just that, but do you have the proper logs? Do you have the logs to actually detect what you need to detect? Because we don't want to be I don't think you want to be the leading news story tonight or the next scoop by Brian Krebs. And are you actually paying attention to your SIM, or is it just logging for compliance? If you turned off your SIM, how long would it take you to actually notice it was not running? Okay, so we've established that incidents are inevitable. So what are you going to do? Don't wait till something happens. Because if you do, time's going to be wasted, money lost, and mistakes made. Do you immediately pull the affected resource offline? Or do you need to worry about the chain of evidence? You need to know who to call. And you also need to know what the limitations of your team are. You need to know what capabilities do we have, and do we have the kind of data that we need to be worried about, or do we need to worry about having a third-party retainer in place so that we can call the true experts and get them in without legal snafus? Okay, now for the fun stuff, right? We've been waiting for this. And advanced techniques are great, but they're useless and irresponsible without a baseline. One option is honeypots. Whether it be honey files or honey tables. Create some users out there that should never be logged into and alert every time they are. Or create a file or a table in your database that has what would appear to be sensitive information and see who's trying to access it or modify it. Pen testing. We all love pen testing. Who hasn't popped shell? It's so much fun. If you haven't, I really suggest you do it at least once. But until you have the basics, it's dangerous and a waste of time because you haven't proved anything. You've proven you're vulnerable. That's it. So, but the wonderful thing about pen testing is once your security practice becomes more mature, it becomes a real validation. You verify that not only do you have the controls in place, but you have the visibility to see it, and you have the way to respond to it. So the IT landscape is changing every day. We know that. Whether it be mainframes to personal computers, or now we're on to cloud and smart devices, the only thing we know is it's going to continue to change. So don't be caught off guard. Look what happened when BYOD first came out. Most companies weren't ready for it, and so they had to play catch up. And the CEO doesn't always ask the security team if he can implement new technology. He says, I'm doing it. I bought my new iPad. By God, it's going to be on the network. So make sure you understand, make sure you're aware and you can help secure that policy before the company makes a decision. And it's really important to pick your battles. If you're always the security guy that just says no, then you've lost your voice. Be the enabler. Help bring the technologies on in the right way so that you can gain their trust and earn political capital. So when it's time to say no, they'll actually listen. And so we need to be involved and get back. Continue learning. Go to cons like you are here. Don't be afraid to dive in and figure it out. And learn from others. Ask questions. As you learn new things, continue to iterate to the process. Go back. You learn something new. Go back and evaluate your inventory. See if it affects you. Do you have a policy to handle it? Do you have the visibility to detect it? And can you validate it with a pen test? And get involved with other regional and local cons. I had an opportunity to get involved with one of the regional cons 3 years ago, and it's been a fantastic experience. Learned a tremendous amount from some very smart people and met great connections in the industry. So if you don't know where to start, just find somebody and ask. Most every con I've seen, always looking for volunteers. But it's also important to not just look outside the information security industry. Don't just come and talk to other information security people. If you're in security, go back. If you're a recovering admin, go back to a Microsoft conference or an admin conference and try to bring more people over from the dark side. Try to or if you're a former developer, go to a developer conference and see if we can't help some of that before it ever starts. I want to definitely thank BSides for offering Proving Ground, for providing the opportunity for new speakers. And I want to definitely thank my mentor on this, Guillaume. And I'm sure I just butchered your name, so I apologize. So, any questions? Sure. Go ahead.
Use the mic.
Yeah, so just one of the questions on your technique, you said to review your ACL and firewall and periodic and make sure you have document. I'm in this position right now, try to work with my networking team. They say they don't have time to document and reinspect all the stuff. So how often do you recommend? Is that periodic review? What's the best practice? Quarterly? Monthly? Annual? I'm trying to bring back some best practice guys so I can convince my networking team.
I think the judgment of what best practice depends. Some of it comes down to, what are you guarding? Is this the firewall guarding just, your internet browsing segment, or is this the one guarding your crown jewels? If it's the one guarding my crown jewels, I'm probably going to watch it a whole lot more closely. What I used to do is, if an ACL didn't have documentation of who put it there and why it was needed, I would just randomly go through and disable it. You'll find out real quickly if it's still needed. I don't know that I do it weekly. I probably wasn't as regimented as I should have been. Like I said, I was not a great admin. But it was definitely, it's amazing how fast they come screaming when you disable the ACL they need. Sure.
So what would you say you did when you were an admin that was the worst for security that you wouldn't do anymore?
Oh. Yeah, did you ever get the camera working? No.
I can say what mine is, because I used to be more in IT before, and one thing sometimes have to do. You work for a company that has little budget or whatever. You end up running a lot of stuff that might not necessarily be safe on networks that are not super well segmented. And that's something that you see penetration testers do from time to time. They'll just grab some exploit from somewhere. And, whoa, that looks like an exploit, and compile it and use it, which can be really dangerous if you don't really know what it does. So that's one thing that I think I was guilty of, maybe 10 years ago when I was in IT. So I was just wondering if there's like one thing that you think you were doing back then that you wouldn't do anymore.
Staying quiet, letting you see things you know are wrong, and letting it go for either fear of speaking up. And that applies to everybody. I mean, whether we're talking about the human sensor and seeing malicious email, if you ridicule and browbeat your users because they clicked on a bad link, they're not going to come to you and tell you that they saw something come through. They're going to delete it and be quiet. So you've just lost your opportunity for detection at that point. But as an admin, being so focused on the making it work, even if sometimes cowering to the business side of saying, hey, it's got to work today. Well, I can make it work right next week, but and it kind of comes down to one of my friends had a quote in his cube for years, and it was, if you don't have time to do it right, when are you going to have time to do it again? And so taking the time to put it in place the right way, because once it's in wrong, it'll never change.
Yeah, it's temporary, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So, anybody else?
So you gave a lot of good examples and things that we should do. Do you have any idea of what's a good, how would I prioritize some of this stuff? If I am going to be, like you said, if I'm going to be attacked in a week, what would I go change? How can I prioritize? What should I focus on first?
That's going at the end of the day, these companies are all in business to make money, not to be secure. So you've got to understand, that's probably part of the inventory is understanding your crown jewels. You've got to know that if I lost this, I'm closing my doors tomorrow. So if there's low-hanging fruit that you can go knock out quickly to protect your crown jewels, if there's something you need to focus on, if you have proprietary, or industry data, that's your product differentiator, guard it, even if you realize you may have to give up somewhere else. Thank you, guys.